All right. How many of you are the first person in your family to go to college? Anybody? No? You? Nobody else? Oh, well, I'm one of those. I'm the first person in my entire family ever to go to college. And I always really liked biology, my favorite subject all through school. And one reason is that my family really liked what was going on in our yard in Chicago. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. In fact, that's my backyard. That's me on the left, my little brother, and my mom looking at a caterpillar on a tree trunk. You can see it's a close-packed neighborhood. But my mother was the kind of person who saw things happening in the yard and called attention to it, and we all went out and looked at it, you know. And I would torture caterpillars and other insects and so forth. So she was a very important reason that I was interested in biology and remained so throughout my life and hers. I went off to college and did many things other than study. I'm the person with the bass guitar on the left there. It was a semi-successful rock and roll band. But I did study, and I did graduate and went on to graduate school. But I have to tell you that it wasn't until my senior year of college that I realized that you could actually have a career in science that wasn't being a medical doctor. Nobody in my family had ever thought of that. It was a complete surprise to me. So I went on to graduate school. I learned to use all sorts of sophisticated scientific instruments. That, by the way, is a giant vacuum cleaner that sucks insects off of plants. Okay, it's a way of sampling insects. Okay, and eventually published, completed a PhD thesis. This is the title, and it sounds almost as obscure as any title you would see these days, right? So all through this, my mother remained interested in what I was doing, and I would go home periodically and explain what I was doing to her. But of course, she had absolutely no background in any of this. So from the time I entered college until now, or until actually she passed away 2 years ago, it was my job to explain what I'm doing to my mother, who had no scientific background. Okay, and that continued well into all through her life, pretty much. She's helping me with field work here and asking me what the hell's going on with this tree. But this is our task, is trying to figure out how to explain to someone like my mom, or yours, or whoever, who is not a scientist and not an academic, what we're doing and why. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. We're not talking about convincing the other people in your laboratory that you know what you know. We're not even talking about convincing other scientists about this. We're talking about explaining and convincing science things to people who are not scientists. Clear? Okay. Why do we care about that? Well, this is Dr. David Mendoza Cozatl, who's here in the center, and he's speaking to a gentleman there who's probably not a scientist. Would you agree? Okay, can you guess what that person's occupation is? Come on, you can stereotype this. Well, he looks like he's probably engaged in agriculture, right? I mean, this is a hat typical here in Missouri of a farmer and so forth, all right, which is sort of true. But actually, he's a Missouri state legislator. And he's on the legislative committee that helps decide how much money the University of Missouri will get from the state legislature. He does not have a science background. In fact, he may not have gone to college. But he's very important, and it's extremely important, and more important every day, to be able to explain ourselves to somebody like that. So it's no longer my mom, but it's practically everybody else that we have to explain things to. So we're gonna have 4 things we're gonna talk about here. Excuse me. And you'll see that actually at 4, that's about the limit that you'll be able to retain anyway. But the first one here is me knowing who you are, which of course I do. In this case, I didn't have to actually talk to you beforehand here to know who you are and what you do. But number one rule, whether you're writing or talking or singing or whatever it is to know your audience so that you can relate to the audience. It's different talking to a legislator than it is to my mother. You want to feel familiar with the audience enough that you feel like you're having a conversation, and actually that's the way I feel at the moment. I am sort of shouting at you, but that will stop soon, and I like to think that, you know, if you want to raise your hand and interrupt me, feel free, okay? Obviously, this is the easy one for you all. You have to use terms that your audience, whoever it is, understands. And if it's not another scientist, they're not going to listen to you if you don't give them a reason to. I mean, the average person walking down the sidewalk, if it's not my mother, doesn't care about what you're doing. If you don't know who you're interacting with, you can't do any of these things. So, each of you can probably do a one-liner about what your research is, right? Would you explain your research the same way to each of these four audiences? Well, I'd like to see you try. I mean, it would be really difficult. And you're simply not going to get a message across to each of these four audiences using the same words, the same approach, and the same structure. Our audience is really that different, and our audience is homogeneous. I mean, not every one of you here has English as your first language. You all have different cultural backgrounds, okay? Can I assume that you all see me, hear me, and think the same way about what I'm saying? No, probably not, and if I do, it's probably going to be dangerous to do that. So here's a little exercise. Here are some words that describe an animal. Take a look at these words and conclude or decide what animal you think I'm describing here. Any suggestions? I'm prepared to stand here until you speak.
Dog.
Hmm?
A dog.
Dog? Okay. Cat. Anything else? Okay, well, sure, could be a dog. Those words describe a dog, but they also describe a cat, right? And of course I selected them so that you couldn't conclude one or the other. How many of you have families or you have yourself a dog as a pet? Anybody? But you suggested cat.
Yeah.
Do you also have cats?
Because dogs are not just carnivores.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, oh, Jesus, scientists, God. The point here is that the same set of words means different things, brings up different images in different people's minds. What that means is that you, as my audience, walk in the door with preconceived notions about things. Each of you has a different mental image of what these words mean. And if this were a convention of cat owners, and I assume that those words meant dog, I'm going to have trouble getting a message across. Okay? So I would want to know if this is an audience of cat lovers before I spoke to it. Otherwise, there's a chance to make a mistake. And it's really easy, and this is a characteristic of human brains. This is the way we work. As a consequence, for those of us who are talking about science, there are tons of problems that can arise because we have this specialized language. When the audience is not aware of your specialized language, they often have a different mental image. They may be thinking cat while you're saying dog, or they may be thinking dog when you're saying cat, because you're using words they're not familiar with. Okay, so your average audience, when they see these terms, I mean, some of you probably work with gene expression. I don't know, I do. Okay, we know what carbohydrates and proteins are. Do we have plant biologists in here? Have you worked with mutant plants? No. Anybody else work with mutants all the time, right? Okay. And I bet some of you would say that you work with a model system, or you have a model, right? Okay, well here's what the average person thinks when you say those words. Okay? And this is really true. In fact, you'll be hearing from John Stemmel soon, and John and I often do workshops together. And the really great benefit of working with John is that he has no science background. And as soon as you say protein, he says, "You mean steak?" Yeah, because that's the way he is. Well, this is a real problem, and I'm sure you're all aware of the jargon problem that we have with science. Okay. These are pretty simple concepts, and they're popular ones. Okay. Do we have any? We don't have any journalism students in here, do we? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. What section are you in? What department?
Strategic communication.
Okay. Can you guess what grade level journalism students are taught to write for news reporting, like newspapers? What school grade? Oh, you're here too, I forgot. What school grade level? Eighth grade. Mm-hmm. Let's see, how old is an eighth grader? 13, 14? Okay. So, your language, when you're explaining your science, needs to be appropriate for a 13-year-old. Not for a 20-year-old, not for a 70-year-old, okay? And you have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, you've got that problem. So, eighth grade is the magic number, and you'll probably see in a couple of minutes here that if you're using Microsoft Word, there is a function that allows you to characterize what you have written by grade level. It's under the spelling and grammar tab. Okay. So, for an eighth grader, what does this say? Translate this for me. What's irradiance, you suppose? Light, right? Okay. Here's a technical term. Doesn't sound technical, but specific leaf area refers to how thick or massive, how much mass there is per unit area of a leaf. Okay. Photosynthetic acclimation means trying to get used to whatever light level you have. So basically what this says is that when plants are grown in the shade, they produce bigger leaves that are thinner. I think a 13-year-old could get that, but a 13-year-old won't get this. And that's a real title. So we have an understandability issue, and then we have a why do I care issue. So some of these will sound familiar to you. Why would a 13-year-old care about this? Who's our dandelion person? He's not here. Okay, good, so we can pick on him. No idea? You can't make something up? Come on, it's your job to get an audience all excited about this. How are you going to do that?
Cut up dandelions, but not humans. It's easy to cut up dandelions to see what's happening compared to...
Okay.
If a dandelion is sick, you can cut it up and see what's going wrong, but you don't want to cut up a human and see what's wrong.
True. Let's suppose, you're thinking about the model system issue, yeah. Let's suppose this is Saturday morning science, which happens here every Saturday, and we have an audience full of typical Columbia residents who are sort of suburbanites, middle to upper middle class people. What's their connection with dandelions? It's a weed, yeah. They don't want them around. They want to get them out of their lawn, right? So no matter where this story is going about dandelions and the research, the one thing that every or most audiences will understand is that this is the thing they don't like in their yard, or at least, now I have to specify, that's a middle to upper middle class American suburban type things. You know, in Rwanda, dandelions don't matter to anybody, I'm sure, you know, so. Okay. Uh-huh. Well, I mean, I know as you went on in this speech, you defined multi-omic, but even then, so look at this guy's skeptical. He wants to know why he should listen to you.
It's not just him, other researchers are also skeptical about it.
Yeah, okay, all right. What do you suppose that guy knows what an algorithm is?
Maybe.
No.
Computer program, perhaps?
Yeah, well, how about a 13-year-old? Where do 13-year-old kids encounter algorithms all the time? Instruction manuals. How do, if you shop at Amazon, you very quickly start getting suggestions for things to buy. They do that with an algorithm, right? Mm-hmm. There are actually lots of everyday experiences that even a 13-year-old has with what you're interested in, but you have to realize how they see it and not how you see it. Then you still have the job of getting them interested, okay? And you may find that that's more useful to you, getting them interested in algorithms, than even the multi-omic stuff, okay? So I'm sorry to be picking on people, but I'm going to keep it up because you know what you're saying and you're familiar with it, okay? Okay, well, on the dandelion story, you came up with the idea that working on dandelions has advantages because you're not slicing up humans. Okay, that's great. What do you think interests humans more than anything else on the planet? Themselves. That's exactly right. Okay. So here's a problem for you. We have two pictures here of an individual potentially drowning because of climate change. Okay, the ice is melting and polar bears no longer have a place to get out of the water, and we're having extreme weather events putting people at risk of drowning. You're confronting these two situations. Which one are you going to save? Come on. Come on. Yeah, of course, yeah. Sure, actually I did have one person once say they'd save the bear instead, but but that's not a very common, you know, point of view. Yeah. Anytime your story contains a human element, you'll get more attention. People will remember it. It's absolutely a sure thing. This is why biomedical researchers, in my opinion, the biomedical researchers have a little easier time than somebody like me who works on insects and plants, you know, because what they do has a direct impact on people, and that's what people like to hear about. If you look at the top 100 most viewed TED Talks, you'll see that almost all of them are about humans solving human problems, getting better at something, you know. There are very, very few straight science talks in the first 100. So, this one's probably familiar to you all too. Okay. What's the potential interest here? Huh? Come on. It's a human disease, right? It kills people. Cystic fibrosis, right? If you don't say that pretty quickly, audience is gone, right? Proteins, does it mean pork chop? Receptors, what is that, baseball or something? What, you know, okay? Football. So again, this story has the advantage that it is about a issue of human concern. But you got to be explicit about that. You know, we're going to save lives with what I do, is what gets the average person engaged in this. In fact, here it is. Here's the receptor. What the hell is that? I mean, people are not going to... Which of those two things gets an audience interested in cystic fibrosis research? I think it's pretty clear. Okay, so here's a little, we're going to play a little game here. I'll bet each one of you can give me a one-liner about what you're doing in your research. For example, I study the ways in which plants defend themselves against attack by insects. Okay? And oh, by the way, we're saving the world's food supply by doing this. So I put a human in there. Okay, so here's your audience. Give me your one-liner for this audience.
I'm studying how elderberry juice can decrease someone's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease.
Great, terrific. Anybody else want to try this one? Chickens. Okay, how about this one? Somebody want to try this one? Give me a one-liner about your research for this audience. Would you use the same one?
Probably.
You could. But what kind of group is this, you think? They're farmers.
Yeah.
Farmers. So you have another connection you could make, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so who can do theirs for this one?
So I'm trying to simulate how maize would grow in drought conditions using computers.
Terrific. Excellent. Great. Okay. How about this one? This will be a tough one for you, but why don't you try it? Remember, I know what you do.
So doctors or
Yeah, they're physicians. Mm-hmm.
physicians? Okay. So I'm studying how drought could affect insect feeding and the consequences of that for food production.
Okay. Is there any chemistry in what you're doing?
Not sure.
You're not sure yet. That's part of the research. Okay. All right, anybody else want to try this one? You did one. Yeah.
I study targeted delivery in cancer drugs.
Great. Yeah, terrific. You might want to tell us how wonderful the outcome's going to be, but that's good. That's good. Okay, now here's a really good one for you. These are younger than 13. Somebody want to try this one?
I'm studying on identifying a more pesticide-tolerant honeybee strain so that we can save the honeybees which pollinate for our food, for our crops of what we eat.
Remember, no background here. Even pesticide is probably over their heads. So what is the exciting thing from their point of view that could come out of what you're doing? They do know what bees are, and they probably think they're good things.
The bees are dying and I'm trying to find a way to save them.
There you go. That was easy, right? Okay, now here's one more. Oop. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button, of course. Who's willing to try this one? Come on. Really? Okay.
I find ways to treat cancer without killing. Well, I find ways to treat cancer without the patients losing their head.
Okay, sure. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, this is a really tough one, of course. If you can find, obviously for this crowd, if you can find anything humorous in what you do, that would help with them. All right. Now, there's an important general point here about all these different audiences. You saw right away that you'd probably have to pitch your your ideas a little differently for different audiences. That seems kind of obvious. But what the audience members think is really dependent on who they're sitting with and who their friends and their circle of connections is. And that's extremely well established in psychological research. And here is a very, 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 very famous experiment that demonstrates this.
The Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. The volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test.
You can tell it's in the 70s.
About group conformity.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example,
the actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1, 1, 1. Two.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3.
The Asch experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we'll still go along.
1. 1. 1.
Group dynamics is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology.
1. 1.
Anybody who followed the U.S. elections this past year now knows that people are willing to agree to something they probably know is wrong. Right? And this is why. Fake news works for this reason. Okay? Doesn't matter who it is, what the subject is. People will agree with those they know and love, or they know on Facebook, even if it's pretty clear that whatever it is not correct. Okay? So when you deal with an audience, what that guy, I think it is, thinks is determined by the rest of the audience, the people with whom he or she affiliates. Okay? Now, we just showed earlier, you all demonstrated that not everybody here sees cats and dogs the same way. So you can't actually expect an audience to be uniform. But you'd really want to know that you're talking to a room full of clowns before you step out on the stage, so you can account for this, right? There's going to be a general way clowns are going to think about what you say. There's going to be a general way fourth graders will. Okay? Most scientists give almost no thought to who their audience is. You're interviewing for a job in a biology department. Biology departments are diverse because they have to teach lots of subjects. Okay? You're hired because you're the expert on grasshoppers. Okay? And they need somebody to teach a course about grasshoppers. Does anybody else in the biology department know about grasshoppers? Well, no, they're hiring you because they need that, right? Okay. So if you give a talk on your job interview to a diverse audience of biologists, and you forget the fact that you're the only one who knows about grasshoppers and they don't think about it, you're going to have a hard time getting the job. This is also why you can't assume that how smart or educated your audience is will actually make a difference in your ability to convince them of something. What you see here is a relationship between whether people think that there are risks involved in climate change and how much they know about climate change. You would think, as graduate students, that people who were better informed, more educated, and more familiar with the subject would probably conclude that there are likely to be some kind of risk associated with climate change, but actually there's no relationship. Smart, not so smart, educated, not so educated. This decision is being made on the basis of something other than facts and something other than information. So, your ability to influence an audience is at least as dependent on your ability to convince them, irrespective of the facts, as it is how good your facts are. That's very disappointing for many of us. Right? Scientists like to say, let my data speak for themselves. Data don't talk. So let's watch a master of this begin his talk. This is the TED Talk. This is the most watched TED Talk in the history of TED. 54 million people so far have watched this talk. Okay? You should be able to tell right from the start that he has spent time getting to know his audience. Now, he has the advantage that he's at a conference, and so the previous days he's been meeting people and talking to them. But he can come out on the stage and say, I know you agree with me about this, because he knows who they are, and he spoke with them. Okay? So let's see. I love this. This guy's talk is so good, I weep.
Good morning. How are you? It's been great, hasn't it? I've been blown away by the whole thing. In fact, I'm leaving.
He's also hilarious.
There have been three themes running through the conference, which are what I want to talk about. One is the extraordinary evidence of human creativity in all of the presentations that we've had and in all the people here. Just the variety of it and the range of it. The second is that it's put us in a place where we have no idea what's going to happen in terms of future. No idea how this may play out.
Now, he has gotten the audience to agree with him that they all agree about something, which he can do because he knows the audience and he spoke with them. He's going to make the case here that education destroys creativity. That's what his talk is about. And so what you're seeing him do here is get the audience on board, agreeing with him about certain assumptions at the start, so he can put them together to make his case. Oh, come on. But he says too much. No, he doesn't. Oh, sorry, I got to start over. Well, it's all right.
How are you?
I'm well, yeah.
It's been great, hasn't it? I've been blown away by the whole thing.
Isn't he conversational?
There have been three themes, haven't there, running through the conference, which are relevant to what I want to talk about. One is the extraordinary evidence of human creativity in all of the presentations that we've had and in all the people here. Just the variety of it and the range of it. The second is that it's put us in a place where we have no idea what's going to happen in terms of future. No idea how this may play out. I have an interest in education. Actually, what I find is everybody has an interest in education.
Don't you agree?
I find this very interesting. You go to at a dinner party and you say you work in education. Actually, you're not often at dinner parties, frankly. Actually, if you work in education, you're not asked, you know, and you're never asked back, curiously. That's strange. But if you are, and you say to somebody, they say, what do you do? And you say, you work in education, you can see the blood run from their face. They're like, oh my God, you know, why me? My one night out all week. But if you ask people about their education, they pin you to the wall. Because it's one of those things that goes deep with people, am I right? Like religion and money, and other things. So, I have a big interest in education, and I think we all do. We have a huge vested interest in it, partly because it's education that's meant to take us into this future that we can't grasp.
So we're all here about the future. We all agree that creativity is incredible and important. We think that education has something to do with the future. The next thing he's going to do is hammer education as killing creativity. Okay, but his conversational, interaction with the audience is just remarkable. Humor is great. There's lots of reliable research showing that if I tell you something that makes you laugh, you'll remember it better than if I tell you the same thing without making you laugh. All right, humor actually cements people's memories of things. However, it's a little tricky. We're not all naturally funny, okay? And so, I can occasionally be funny, but I wouldn't count on it to make my case because it's just not so much me. Okay, so that was all about knowing your audience. Let's suppose you're in his situation, or you're going to give a Saturday morning science talk here to a general audience. You actually don't know them. Is there any way you can get a grasp of what they're like so that you can deal with them in the ways we're talking about?
Ask a question. You could ask a question.
Could ask a question, and you saw him do that. He said, "You all agree with me on this, right?" Yeah. What else? Something really scary and very simple.
You can ask, before having a talk, you can send a survey.
That's true. Well, you can send a survey, but if you don't have a chance to do that...
I mean, there are things like you register, registration to attend.
Right.
To attend the seminar.
And actually, even the simpler thing is you circulate among the audience and talk to them. I mean, it's remarkable. I remember I gave a talk once where I discovered by talking to my audience beforehand that a lot of them were really interested in fishing, So I actually changed a couple of my stories to incorporate fishing as an activity. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wandering around in the audience and meeting them. They'll love you for that, I tell you. Okay, so scientists have this problem. Okay. We tend to have the view that because we pay attention to many details in our work and the way we try to understand things, that everybody cares about all those details, and that is simply not true. I'm really sorry to tell you this, but not everybody cares about all the details of what we do. Okay? So, as you heard from Suzanne Burgoyne, you need to think about, why am I talking to these people? And then, as I just pointed out, who is it I'm talking to? And then think to yourself, how much do I actually have to tell them to accomplish that goal I set out at the start? Interesting things come up. My daughter was a cancer patient who was saved because we had Obamacare, Affordable Care Act insurance. Okay? And she's actually recently developed, she shows up in commercials and things all the time trying to preserve that health insurance plan. She's giving she's the lead speaker at a rally. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people this coming weekend, and she's, "Dad, what am I going to do?" She's emailing me. And the critical question was, is she there? What's she there to do? Is she there to inform? Is she there to create enthusiasm? Is she there to bash the government? I mean, what is her goal? Okay? And again, if you know your audience, you will discover that each of those goals does not require everything you know about your subject. Okay? So here's a little demonstration of how hard it is for people to deal with everything you know. You're going to have to type or write something down here. Okay? So please get ready for that. All right, these are 2 letters. When they go off the screen, I want you to write them down. Oh, they're gone. Did you remember? Did you see them? Okay, here's the next set. Write them down. No writing them down while they're on the screen. Okay, next set. Next set. Next. Write it down. What? There you go. Last one. No writing, no writing. Go for it. All right, do I need to ask the question, did anybody get the last one? No, but usually people don't. Every once in a while in an audience you run into somebody who's got a super memory, you know. All right, so what we were doing here was increasingly loading your short-term memory. Would you agree with me that there is clearly a limit to that? Okay. So almost nobody probably remembered this, probably nobody that one. Somebody might have gotten this one. This kind of research, some of which, by the way, was done here at the University of Missouri, has led to a very, very well supported conclusion that on average people cannot retain more than 3 to 5 items in their short-term memory. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that unless you write down what you and I are discussing, you're only going to remember about 3 or 4 things that you heard me say. Okay, that's why, of course, why we take notes, right? How many of you have had a lecture course in which more than 3 things were asked, you were asked to remember more than 3 things from a lecture? Come on. If this doesn't ruin all classes for you in the future, I don't know what will. Generally speaking, for the normal presentation that we give in science, you can expect your audience to be only able to take home only about 3 conclusions, 3 or 4, somewhere in there. And they can only hang on to it for so long, so you need to give them about 20 minutes or so to get it into their permanent memory. And that means you can really only do a new topic every 20 minutes or so. I'm violating all that today, by the way. Okay? All right, another thing that influences your ability to remember these things is how difficult the task is. All right, it seemed to get more difficult with more letters, but it's actually just more information. What's the answer here? Yeah, right. Okay. All right, without writing, what's the answer to this one? You're getting, I think, about 20 seconds. I'll bet nobody got it, right? Okay, all right. All right, now that one didn't have more information in it, but the information was harder for you to get, to grasp. By the way, that's just like you having to translate jargon. If those were words, and they were words you had never seen before, you would be spending your brain time and space trying to figure out the words and not getting the message, all right? So the more difficult the task is, the more of your brain is required to do it. Okay? This is easy, that's hard. A lot of people would argue that science is hard, that you're trying to get across difficult, complicated points. Well, this is a good reason not to try to get across all of your difficult points. You got to keep them few and simple. And by the way, another fact of brain life is that research shows that if I show you a picture of the point I'm making while I'm making it or associated with it, you are more likely to remember it than if you just listen to me. So that's why there's a picture up there. You will probably remember the green spots on the brain more than whatever I said at this point. Pictures plus words are better than words alone. Okay, so what would you take out of what you're currently saying about your research to deal with this problem? Anything come to mind right away? What's something that's in your your current presentation that doesn't actually have to be there to explain what you do? Aptamers? Yeah, sure. Nobody is ever going to understand what aptamers are. Yeah, yeah. You've got to find another way to describe them. Right. And that's sort of a jargon issue. There may be some details in there too that aren't necessary to get the message across. I told you that I work on how plants defend themselves against insects. Okay, that's all chemistry, and I could go on and on and on about different kinds of chemistry. In fact, I did yesterday. I gave a 2-hour lecture on that. But you'd be asleep pretty quick, and I wouldn't get my point across. Okay, what works for me is I ask everybody, "Did you have coffee today?" Okay, and I ask them why they had coffee today, and they tell me it's because it helps them wake up and stay alert. Okay, and then I ask them, well, everybody knows what caffeine is, and I say, well, okay, but coffee comes from a plant. Caffeine works because it interacts with your nervous system. Plants don't have nervous systems. Why is coffee making that caffeine? All right, and the answer is it's an insecticide. All right, I don't have to go into the details about how caffeine works or anything to get the basic point across, which is plants defend themselves with chemistry. Okay, and you can probably do the same thing. We could do that exercise, but actually I was going to pin you down to actually give me, each of you to give me something you would dump, but because I took so much time setting up here, I'm going to cut that short a little bit. Okay, point number 3, there are only 4 points. Point number 3 is, to the extent possible, do whatever you do in a story-like format and put yourself in it. How did I start this conversation? What was the first thing I talked about?
Background, how you got started.
Yeah, my mommy, right? Everybody loves their mothers. Most people loved my mother. Okay. And the fact is that, again, you know the rule about keeping humans in it. Well, it's even better if you're in it, if at all possible. Okay? But there's more to it than that. It turns out that human brains are designed to operate with a story format. There's lots of physiological and other evidence of that. But first, let's look at a couple examples. This is another one from this group. Okay? And this starts off great. This is exactly what I was thinking of. Okay? The only thing that could be better here would be if it were your wife or husband. But this is a good example that this is a human example, and it involves the speaker personally, and it starts a story. This one is similar, not quite as story-like. Okay? But again, it's directly connected to human values, and you can imagine the story growing out of this one. Okay, now this one says it's going to share a story, but actually many of us think of what we do as stories. I mean, I can tell you stories about what plants do and what insects do and so forth, but to the average person, a story is a specific thing. It has a problem that needs to be solved. It has action to take care of that problem. Usually people are involved. I mean, it's a particular format. This one has the potential to go that way, but didn't. Evidence that what I'm telling you is true comes from studies of how people actually learned science that they did learn. And way more people learned about DNA from the TV show CSI than ever learned about it in school. And recent research shows, in fact, using these TV programs, researchers recently showed that they do a more effective job at getting people to learn and remember things about human health and science than any other format. And there are lots of examples from around the world. A soap opera in Mexico is credited with increasing the literacy rate in Mexico hugely. Well, what happens is people identify with the characters in the story and their situations. And so what a story does is it provides vicarious experience. It's the next best thing to actually doing the thing yourself. If we wanted to cure somebody of fear of snakes, the best thing to do is get them to hold a snake. But the next best thing to do is to tell them a story about how snakes are okay, and look at this person who learned to love snakes. Okay? And in fact, very recent, 2014, research indicates that the patterns of brain activity that are established in the brain of somebody telling a story are mirrored in the brains of people hearing the story. So while I was telling you about me and my brother and my mom looking at the tree, you were right there, and if we had scanned your brains, they would have looked just like mine telling the story. Right? There is almost no better way to get somebody else's brain on your subject. So I talked about, their stories have structures. Typical kind of situation is there's a problem to be solved. Currently, that's the current status. That situation now should be better. We want to improve it. In order to improve it, there is something we have to do, a challenge, a hurdle to be overcome. We have to develop an algorithm, for example. Okay. What you're going to do is research to overcome this challenge, and if successful, everything will be great or better. Okay. In the future, as a consequence of doing what you did, we're going to be in a better place. Of course, we have to use what you know, and some of you are never going to go there, but at some point we will reach, because of what you did, we will reach a new status. This is in story talk, it's called the resolution or denouement. All right, but it's better than the current. This typical story structure. Most of our stories are a little more complicated than that. Here's a more complicated version. We already talked about connecting with your audience of clowns. Okay, so we assume that you know who you're talking to, and you're going to take that into account. But there is a problem. Not enough food. That's our current state. What we would like to reach is an ideal state in which this is no longer true. But we've got this problem that has to be overcome in order to get there. We're going to do something. We're going to work on something to overcome this hurdle and wind up where we want it to be. Make sense? You might want to actually look at your scripts and ask the question, how close am I to this form? I would really suggest doing that. You probably have heard that there is an international competition called the 3-minute thesis competition. Started in Australia. Here is one of the winners recently, and see how many of the things we've discussed so far she manages to do here. Her Australian accent is something else too, I gotta say.
Do you want to spend the rest of your life sick and miserable? Surely you'd rather be healthy. Surely you would rather be happy. Well, unfortunately, most of us aren't both these things.
Current state.
Nearly 2/3 of adult Australians are overweight or obese, and the other third probably wish they had more cake. So how can we be both healthy and happy? Some people assume that low-calorie alternative sweeteners mean we can eat as much junk food as we like and still be healthy. But the research on this has shown mixed results. It's not fully understood exactly how these sweeteners impact our health. Are all sweeteners the same, or are some healthier than others?
You're setting the hurdle that has to be overcome.
To discover. By studying the way alternative sweeteners affect our cells on the molecular level, I aim to determine if there are differences between the sweeteners to find out which is healthiest. All sweeteners interact with a protein called the sweet taste receptor. The sweet taste receptor is like a toddler with a craving for lollies. You're probably aware of her on your tongue. Anytime you eat chocolate, she grabs onto anything sweet and sends signals to the brain. She says, "This is yummy, finish the whole block." But what you might not realise is that this same sweet taste receptor is also in the small intestine and the pancreas. It is here where she signals our bodies to absorb more sugar from our food and to modify our insulin just a protein. Well, she doesn't actually say this in words. Instead, she signals our cells by sending smaller molecules out as messages. So to find out what she is telling our body, I'll be measuring these messenger molecules. If different sweeteners lead to different messages, they could also lead to different health effects. And with this knowledge, we could then choose the sweeteners that have the health effects that we want, such as reduced sugar absorption. So whatever your needs are, whether you're overweight or you're diabetic or if you just want more cake, my research can help you to find the sweetener that gives you the best of both, the most happiness, but with the least health effects. Now wouldn't that be sweet?
So you could detect that she set up the current condition. People are not well, and everybody likes sweets, okay? And there's a potential solution, but to know if that solution actually works and improve the current condition, we need to find this thing out. Now I want to point out that this was a winning presentation. She hasn't even started her research yet. I mean, this was essentially a proposal. She hasn't done this yet, okay? And yet, I think the audience probably came away thinking, boy, that's a really good idea. I want to see what you find out, okay? By the way, you all know that lollipops are candy in Australia. Took me a minute to figure that out, yeah. So that's really nice, and you could plot what she did there on the graph I showed just previously. Here we are, there's where we want to be, here's what we got to do, that's what'll happen, okay? So, all this time, I've been, until a couple of years ago, I was constantly explaining my transcriptional analyses to my mother. She remained interested till the end, and I had to keep translating till the end. In fact, there she is. There's my little brother on the right and me on the left, and we're still looking at bugs on plants, okay, just a couple of years ago. Your audiences are going to be more like that. Okay. Fourth and last point. You probably heard this before and you're going to hear it again. And I'm telling my daughter, who's got to give her big speech on Saturday, all problems can be solved through practice. Another way to say it is practice makes perfect. Well, the fact of the matter is, you can agree with me about everything we said here today. You can try to, account for all these points in your presentations or your writings. But in the end, actually doing it means that you've got to practice it. There's just no way around that. How many of you remember, do you recognize these letters? You wrote them down a little while ago, okay? You probably, you recognize them now, but if I asked you what was the fourth set of letters or something, you probably wouldn't remember, right? How could you remember this from that exercise if you knew you had to remember it? What would you do?
Keep reciting it in your head.
Yeah, what do we call that? It's memorizing it, right? Okay. And memorizing consists of doing, thinking, remembering the same thing over and over again until you don't forget it. Okay? This is a draft of the novel Great Expectations. And all of this, you can't really read it, but all of the dark stuff here are revisions. This is one of many revisions that this very famous piece of literature underwent because the author was never quite pleased with the way it was phrased for his audience. Okay? When you do this, you accomplish several things. One of them is your story becomes really embedded in your mind. Because you've gone over it, you had to understand that sentence to answer the question, is this worded correctly? Is this the best word for that use? When I write, I usually I put a draft away for a day, come back to it, and I actually literally go through everything I write, word by word, line by line, asking the question, does this serve the purpose? Do I need this word? Is it the best choice? And even famous writers do the same thing. We in the sciences don't read or look at notes when we give oral presentations. This may be obvious to you, but in the humanities, that is not true. We do a lot of interdisciplinary programs here in the Life Sciences Center. And the first time we had speakers from the humanities and they literally read their presentation, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And the reason, I mean, the perspective that scientists have is that you don't really know what you're talking about if you need to do that. Okay? From the humanist point of view, if you don't read your talk, you're just shooting from the hip and are not to be taken seriously. Different cultures, okay? But putting yourself in a situation that you regard as similar enough to what you're going to be confronting and doing it over and over and over again until it just pops out, you know, as though you're thinking of it on the spot, is really critical. Yeah?
What about if we have a teleprompter?
Have a what?
Teleprompter.
Teleprompter, yeah. Well, let me think. Well, generally, you wouldn't want to do that either, but it helps. I have used those when I have to give like a political kind of speech or something, which is not my native language, actually, you know. The problem is, have you done TV? No? Have you done TV? Yeah? Have you read teleprompters? What are the important points in reading a teleprompter?
Just making sure you're staying with the sentence flow and eyes glued to the words as they're going up the screen.
Yeah, and how wide is it?
It's decently wide. Yeah. So
yeah, like this. Okay, but there are only a few words across, right? They're big.
Yeah.
Right, okay. A real valuable trait to have if you're reading the news, which is done from a teleprompter, is being able to read it without moving your eyes. If you watch news broadcasts and so you want to watch the person reading the news to see if you can tell they're reading, you don't want to be able to tell they're reading, okay? And if the teleprompter's over there, Obama took a huge criticism for this because he had teleprompters on each side and he never looked at the audience directly. He always looked this way, he always looked that way, and you know why? Because he was reading. So I think it really detracts from your ability to connect with your audience. You know, if you have to do it, fine, but let's think about what we've talked about so far. We talked about knowing your audience, and I think we agreed that that's valuable to do, and you want to adjust your language, your level, and maybe even the kinds of things you talk about based on that. See, we talked about simplification. You don't need to say everything you know. All of that, you know, by now I can pretty much concoct a 50-minute talk without rehearsing and without having to do outlines or anything anymore. But doing a detailed outline or the script that you're doing, and it allows you to add the things you think you're going to want in there, return to it, and answer the questions I've been talking about, like, do I need this, do I need that, do I need this? And generally, what I used to do is I'd say, oh, gee, for this point, I'd also want to include this other thing. And then come back later, and very frequently I would take it out because it's either too much or not actually essential to what I was trying to accomplish with the talk. But I found that when I worked through an outline many times, by the time I finished, the outline was pretty much what I was going to say, and I didn't need the outline anymore. So it's something to think about as an approach. So we're back to cystic fibrosis. I'm sorry, but this was the one that popped up, okay? I have highlighted in boldface terms that I think a general audience would probably have trouble with. And you probably agree. I mean, we talked about protein. Protein is now pretty much acceptable to most people, but you have to be aware people don't necessarily think of that as a kind of molecule. They tend to think of it as a pork chop. Chloride ion channel, you're never going to get away with that for hardly any audience. In fact, chloride is not going to be clear to most people. Wild type, well, I was thinking of tigers. Wild tigers. or you know, or lungs, wild lungs. Yeah. Anyway, but you see, there are quite a few here. Now, if you went back to and looked at this and asked yourself, okay, will an 8th grader understand this word? Then the task is very straightforward, and you got to find another word or take it out. Can you do that? Well, it is sometimes a challenge. I mean, can anybody come up with common words for chloride ion channel? Well, this effort actually does that later. Okay, where is it? The door metaphor. Okay. Does your audience need to actually know that this is a chloride ion channel? Probably not, but the important point is that things move into cells and out of cells through a kind of molecular door. All right, and in this disease, that molecular door isn't working correctly. Right? Is that fair? Okay. And what we did was we didn't actually lose the meaning here. I mean, your mentor or your PI or something might be irritated that you didn't actually say chloride ion channel, but that's not your audience, okay? If it's an audience of 8th graders, they know what a door is. Most people now, even 8th graders, know what a cell is, okay? Works great, and it's common language. It's worth, for each one of you, it's worth going through your scripts and doing this exercise. How much is there to remember here? This is pretty rough, but I could identify if you were talking to a science audience and you assume that they needed as much detail as you do, there are up to 17 different facts here that you might expect them to try to remember, and they're not going to, okay? So again, we take Suzanne Burgoyne's point of view, we say, what are we trying to accomplish? What do we need to have in? What do we need to leave out? We need to leave out bad words, jargony words, and we need to make sure there aren't too many things to remember. Who's a honeybee person? Right, I remember, yeah, okay. All right. So what do you think about this? It's kind of story-like, right? But you know, I think the point that would grab your audience first is this one. In fact, you could even ask your audience, have you had an apple today? You know, without bees, you wouldn't have that apple. That's just me speaking. That's not you. I'm not telling you what to say. But while this is a kind of an engaging start, I think you could make it even more engaging by tying it more directly to your audience. Does that make sense? What do you all think? Would you agree with that? I think this is fine, but I think it can be stronger that way. Colony, probably people don't realize that bees are in colonies. I'm sorry, but bees are, as you said before, bees are dying and I'm going to save them. Right? Okay. Cancer is a really good topic to connect with people. Everybody's had this experience or seen it. Statistics can be useful. It's always good to see if you can put numbers into a comparative point of a metaphor or something. You know, as many people as something will be killed by cancer. I mean, it helps people understand that. The question you have to answer is, to the average person, is 1 in 8 a large number or a small number? Now, if you've experienced cancer in your family or yourself, any number is large. But you can't assume that on the part of your audience. And again, if you know that we have seen people around us suffer with disease, why don't you see if you can name one? In my family, we've had 2 people with serious cancer threats, and oh, you heard me use one just earlier, right? And so when I talk about this particular subject, I talk about my daughter or my wife, and people I hate to say it, people love it because it's personal, you know. This is an interesting statistic, and it raises another issue. If you're successful at getting people to listen to you and remember what you say had better be correct and clearly understood. Now this statistic may indeed be correct, but you notice it says some hospitals. Unless you make it really clear, it's some hospitals, not all hospitals, you run the risk of the audience walking out the door thinking that chemotherapy is killing 50% of all cancer patients, which is not the case. It can do that in certain circumstances, okay? So when we talk about simplifying the language, relating to the audience, we're not talking about changing the facts. We're not talking about dumbing down. We're talking about a linguistic issue here, not a factual issue. The facts have to be there, they have to be correct, but they have to be understandable. Does that make sense? Okay. Who's the wetlands person? Yeah, okay. You love wetlands. I love wetlands too. He doesn't really give a shit. Okay. And this is structured, you know, the way we would probably structure talking to ourselves, because we would, amongst ourselves, because we would be very interested in a series of facts about wetlands that maybe we didn't know before. Other scientists are generally intellectually curious. I myself learned from this, and I really liked the content, but it doesn't very much conform to the things we've been saying, and I think I would really go in that direction. Have you worked in wetlands yourself? Yeah? Up to your waist in muck? Oh, there's yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's something almost anybody, an 8th grader, can appreciate, you know, boots full of muck. When I was an undergraduate, I took a field botany course, and we visited the Indiana sand dunes, which are a priceless set of ponds reflecting succession from new ponds to older to older to older, and they get more filled with vegetation and muck and stuff, you know. And the professor, we had to get on the bus at 6 in the morning or something and drive out there from Chicago, and we go to the first pond and it's open water, and the professor jumps out and proceeds to walk out until he's waist deep in the pond, and we're all standing by the bus looking at him like, what's he doing? Is he crazy? What is this? And he says, come on, class, it's over here. And we all had to wait up to here to talk about it. So I like this stuff, but I think it needs to go into a different format. And there's an awful lot of facts here. Well, yeah, except, no. A salamander is eating mosquitoes. That's another fact. Okay, that's one of, you get 3. Okay, so I mean, and there is so much great material to work with here. You just have to decide what your message really is, you know, what you want to accomplish, and squeeze it down to that, I think. Well, here you go. Here's a great story structure. Okay, that's good. One thing you may have noticed in that woman's talk, the Australian woman's talk, is that she concluded by connecting with the introduction. Obviously, I don't have the whole thing on here, but this is a great start. It would be great to end it with more of the story about the grandfather. Okay, but here's the measure you can get from Microsoft Word. It's called the Flesch-Kincaid grade level, and this is, according to it, this was written at an 11th grade level. Okay. This one, I think we saw this one before, was evidently written at about an 8th grade level. That's where we want to be. And I have to say that actually, I didn't look at all of them. I looked at most of them, and most of them were actually pretty close to 8th grade, so I think you're doing pretty well there. Some of them were clearly higher than 8th grade. Okay. All right, so here are the 4 take-home. Know your audience as well as you possibly can. And if that means walking around talking to them, great. Okay? I always do as much homework as I possibly can about my hosts and the people I'm speaking to before I give a talk. Let's see, plant people. You're sort of a plant, ecology. Okay, you're going to talk about plant ecology, plant biology here in Missouri from an agricultural point of view. What systems are you likely to include in that?
Maize.
Maize, okay, and the other one, big one is? Soybeans, right, okay. So if you're going to talk about, you're going to give a lecture on photosynthesis or something, you might use those, right? Okay, now we're going to ask you to do the same thing in Alberta, Canada. You're going to use the same plants? Well, you might not know, right?
I'm not really sure. It's really farm.
Would you assume that it's okay to use the same plants? No. In fact, that recently happened to me. And actually, not really last minute, but along the way in preparing, I thought, okay, for what I'm supposed to talk about, I would normally, here in Missouri, I would use soybeans and maize. Do they grow soybeans and maize in Alberta? And it was at like 500 farmers I was talking to. No, they don't actually. So which meant that I had to do a little more research on the plants themselves because I wasn't as familiar with their biology. Okay, so. And how do you deal with algorithms with people who don't do math?
Well, the way I tell them is it's an instruction manual to do something.
For
there are specific steps in
okay.
the way you do it. If you deviate from the steps, everything goes wrong.
Okay. But the instructions are going to a computer.
Yes.
It's an instruction manual for a computer.
Right.
Right? Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah. And the way, and if somebody is even more, insistent on why you should do that, I say that, you always cannot grow something or cut up something.
Mm-hmm.
So the instruction manual generates a virtual example of what you want to study,
mm-hmm.
and then does it on that. So that,
okay.
that's why you save money also. So just
mm-hmm.
doing hundreds of samples.
Well, as I said before, for that particular example, people are using algorithms all the time and they don't know it. So pointing out something that they're using often gets them going. How can you connect with your audience?
Well, it's Alzheimer's, so most people have a grandparent or know someone that suffers from that.
Okay. Are you going to cure it?
No.
All right, we can figure out what the current state is. What's the ideal state?
The ideal state is to just kind of help people not decline as fast.
Oh, okay. So you're going to try to ameliorate the condition, not eliminate it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. You have a personal story with this?
Yeah, my grandfather.
That's your grandfather. Yeah, okay. Good. Yeah, that's great. Good, good. How do you connect with your audience?
It's a quite common genetic disease in the state. It's the second most common. And
Is it the most common one?
second most.
Second most. Well, that's a number that most audiences can really appreciate. Yeah. Do you know anybody famous who has it?
Maybe I can Google it.
Yeah. John Stemmel will point out in the next workshop all the things you can do, the tricks you can use to get any audience into your story. And one of them is referring to a person, place, or thing that everybody is paying attention to. And so, let's see. Anybody here know what Sjogren's disease is? Okay, it's an autoimmune disorder of the salivary glands. It causes dry mouth. And it also actually attacks the joints. And so you become very sore and stiff and so forth, okay? We have literally one of the world's leading authorities on that, in research on that subject in the building here. And I'm also often having to explain his work to people. And most people are getting familiar with autoimmune diseases. There's so many of them around that they're getting familiar, but still I usually have to explain what that means. But then salivary glands, I mean, who cares really? I mean, you'll notice, by the way, that Walmart has a whole section in the pharmacy for people with dry mouth problems, so it's not that uncommon. But it turns out that Venus Williams, the tennis player, has Sjogren's disease. And I suppose that's why she's not beating her sister anymore, but her tennis career has been influenced by the fact that she is not quite as limber and so forth as she could have been. And if I'm speaking to an audience that I can expect to know who Venus Williams is, then I'll use that because it makes an instant connection. Yeah. Okay. How can you make a connection?
I'm sorry, I was distracted.
That's all right. How can you connect with your audience?
Well, basically, my story is about assessing the care burden of mothers with autism. So I think it's more prevalent.
Yeah, you've got to.
In the United States, and lack of statistics on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but here's the thing. Everybody will be familiar with that situation pretty much. But they have they have a couple of choices. You're writing for or speaking to an audience, some of whom have a connection with autism or are very aware of that, others not so much. The dog and cat difference, right? Okay. All right, but you want them all. So the group that's already interested in autism will pay attention when you say this is a problem. You know about this problem? They'll go, sure. Some of them may actually say, yeah, I know all about it. I don't want to hear anymore. Okay, but a bunch of them won't. So if you can connect it with personal story, something that is generically attractive to the average person, you want to do that. You and I think it's important. You and I are likely to assume that everybody agrees with this. Nah. What are we doing here? Oh, okay. All right. Get rid of the details. I actually wrote a chapter for a book once when I was much younger, and one of the reviewers said, this reads like you wrote down everything you ever thought of in your life. And he was right. He was right, yeah. And that was for a science audience, okay? Your general audience isn't going to remember more than 2, 3, 4 things that you say, so choose them carefully and don't distract them with details, okay? We talked, of course, about the story thing. I was not convinced about the importance of the story structure until very recently when I read that neurophysiological research about brain activity patterns mirroring the story. I'm a data guy. I live a life according to peer review. All right, and so everything that I have described for you today is well supported by peer-reviewed research, okay? And the reason it's that way is that I didn't believe any of it when I started. And I thought, well, wait a minute, is there really evidence for this? I mean, ooh. So, but there is. And then you can't practice too much. How can you connect with your audience with your story?
So I study the baby's life in mother's womb. Everyone from a baby, and inappropriate life in mother's womb would result in disease.
Okay, well, the specific phenomenon is?
Yeah, so the specific disease I'm studying is a overgrowth syndrome. So the baby is quite large.
Oh, is that what, hormonally regulated or dysregulated?
It's genes, some genes dysregulated.
Okay, so it's a genetic defect, sort of. Yeah. Okay. So babies emerge really large? Is that? Okay, and are they healthy otherwise?
They have higher cancer rate for several years of old age, but other than, and also they need to do some surgeries and to fix some abnormalities.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to think of ways to depict this without either being gross or too funny. Well, Some of you are dog lovers. You have a dog? What kind of dog?
German Shepherd.
German Shepherd. Anybody have bulldogs here? No? Okay. All bulldogs are born by cesarean section because they've been bred for a head that's too large to pass through the canal. Okay? So I was wondering if one of the major consequences of this condition was that, you know, the baby cannot be born vaginally, but okay.
In animals, these babies have to go through C-section.
Yeah.
Humans.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I mean, problems like this are, most people get them, but you do have to come up with a sort of a story approach to this that does that. Let's see, who haven't I talked to yet? How can you connect with your audience?
Well, stroke is the one of the leading cause of death and disability in the United States. So on average, for about every 40 seconds, someone in the United States gets a stroke.
Great. Yeah. I mean, that's not great, but those are good numbers. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Those are good numbers, yes. To use. Great.
Great for story.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. You know, when people think about stroke, I think they think it's really horrible because of the consequences if you live on past it, you know.
Like recently, a guy in a Tesla car saved a stroke victim by stopping their car with his Tesla. And,
is that right?
And
yeah.
Is this a story that Elon Musk said, hey, he's a hero?
Oh, yeah. It was a Tesla, you said. Yeah, right. Excuse me. Yeah, and John Stemmel will probably point this out to you, that if you can take advantage of something that was recently in the news for your audience, that really helps you connect. And John's really an expert on that kind of thing. But for example, if you're going to talk about climate change and you're talking in a town that just had a tornado or something, you can, you know, use that. Yeah, well, yeah. So, okay. Who haven't I gotten to? I think we hit everybody, pretty much. All right, I urge you not to memorize your scripts. We really wanted you to do scripts so we could track the changes as you go. If you just memorize it, you will come off like a robot. You really will. I mean, it's extremely hard to remain human with a memorized talk. You know, we were kind of conflicted about that exercise because the problem was that we were having trouble tracking what you decided to do from one to the next. You know, we see you, but we can't remember everything you did. Okay, so the scripts are actually helping us figure out what direction you've taken these things. And I read all of your scripts before doing this, so I could see what you're doing. Okay, questions? You're sure? It's your last chance. Next week I'll be mean. This could involve, you know, if you take all this stuff into account, I would expect you'd probably be revising pretty heavily for the next one. Many of you, not all of you, probably. Yeah.
So, the first point we learned today was knowing your audience.
Yeah.
What if you're talking to an audience that is skeptical of what you're doing? So let's say you're talking about climate change.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The audience is very skeptical
Yeah.
of what you're
Right.
doing. How do you and how do you take advantage of that?
That's a great question. Of course, you've picked almost the toughest example of this situation that currently exists. You know, there are only a few of those. Abortion will be another one, you know. Okay. Well, first of all, you've got to know it. You got to know that the audience is going to be that way, or you're walking into a death trap. You know, I mean, if you don't know you're going to talk to a hostile audience, you're in trouble. So, you know, background research, knowing who, if it's an organization, who they are, what they do. So research to figure that out. Secondly, people will accept even, or at least listen to, differing views if they feel like they know you. So again, if you can possibly interact with the audience before you're going to speak to them, that's very, very helpful in that situation. But finally, and this is tricky, and you wouldn't be asking this question if we have solved it completely. You remember we saw that people develop their beliefs and make decisions about what they think is true and so forth based on their social environment. So that's why you know your audience, so you know what that is like. Okay. If they see you coming from clearly from a different group that is identified as contrary to theirs, it's going to make it much more difficult. So what you have to do is you have to figure out a way to voice what you want to say in terms that you think they're going to accept and like. So for example, some people have had success placing the climate change problem in a religious context for audiences that you could expect would feel that their religious beliefs lead them to want to take care of the earth, be good stewards. Okay, that's certainly true of a lot of Christian belief systems, and probably others as well. In fact, it might be even better represented outside Christianity, I'm not sure. But that has worked for a lot of people, and what you're doing there is you're saying, well, I think there's this problem, and here's the evidence for it, and what do you think we can do about this? I mean, should we be doing something about this or not? And referencing the beliefs that they have that are consistent with that. It's kind of like judo or jujitsu. In judo, what you try to do is take advantage of the other person's momentum, to get what you want out of it, all right? Other situations where that would work. Oh, well, the other one that works is economics. The cost of climate change is pretty recognized by people who care about how much money they have. Here's one that works for me. I told you I've been speaking to these ag groups, farmers and stuff. Let me tell you, they are all changing their farming practices in anticipation of climate change. Right? And they make their living by being sure that they're planting the right plants at the right time to get the right crop. Okay? They have no problem with this existing. That part of it, they're fine with. If you ask them, well, would it be worth solving this problem? They go, sure, because I'm going to lose money if we don't. All of the oil companies are investing heavily in non-petroleum sources of energy. So if you can figure that your audience is receptive to economic arguments, that's another way to do it. But you see, what we're doing in both cases is identifying what the audience is like, what they believe, and trying to work with that. It's been demonstrated repeatedly that working against that fails every time. People hold on to their belief system so strongly that they see a disagreement as a challenge, and it strengthens their belief that you're trying to change. Isn't that encouraging?
So how is the strategy of, one of the strategies we talked about here is getting all of you guys, or you and your audience, on a single page, agreeing to one thing. So another example would be vaccination. There's a group of people that you're going to talk to that hates vaccine, or
oh yeah, right, yeah.
Or they're hostile to vaccine.
Oh, you got a good list here, yeah.
But I've seen speakers try to agree with them on certain issues, like, there's some problems that we need to solve. And I feel like that won't be effective, especially if it goes against facts in science. And also, what if someone listens to the first part of the topic and doesn't go into your problems, or he listens, even this speaker agreed with me on this, and that's all they get out.
All right, so remember I said that I wouldn't tell you something that wasn't peer reviewed. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right. It's pretty much established fact that directly contradicting and disagreeing with any of those groups only strengthens their current stand. Okay, so you just simply cannot walk in the door and say you're all full of it for believing this way. Okay. So in the case of vaccination, all parents care about their children's safety, health, and so forth. Okay. In many cases, they are concerned about things that probably aren't true. But if you just say, what you think is not true. I just did that on Facebook the other day, by the way. Well, it was another string, people saying that vaccination causes autism. It's just not true. But in Facebook, you don't get to interact with the audience that much, So the task there is to figure out what is important to them and to try to figure out how that connects with the point you want to make. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm actually not going to hand you a solution to the vaccination problem because that's a tough one. I mean, the real problem there is that people think, okay, so here's a general rule for all these things, negotiation as well as communicating with people. This will really surprise you, but in general, people act on their own personal behalf first, no matter what. Okay, so they care more about their own kid's health than your kid's health. And you've got to somehow work with that. I haven't actually been in that position. I've stayed away from that. That one. But the general feeling now these days about how to deal with those situations is to find a commonality and pursue it. Figure out, what they do believe that you can work with and get on the same page starting there. But I wish I had better advice, but. More questions? Yeah.
What's your advice for when we're simplifying some of our speech without becoming inaccurate? We're trying to avoid that.
Well, I personally believe that almost all science stories, there are certainly more difficult ones. I did this kind of workshop with another graduate student group recently, and one of them was a mathematician, a pure mathematician, Fortunately, he missed that session. But I had planned lots of time to try to figure out how to make this guy's research intelligible. Other than that kind of thing, I really believe that you can find 8th grade words for anything. I really do. And you can do it in such a way that you don't necessarily violate the meaning. I really do. And it's, again, when I'm preparing something like this, I'm constantly rewording to get those tricky words out of it and find metaphors are powerful, as some of the people here have shown. The open closed door thing really works for that one. Comparisons, if you took Bill Gates's money in $20 bills, the pile would be, I don't know, it was 5 miles high or something. Illustrations like that people can connect with, but it can be done, really. You have a tough one you want to challenge us with?
Particularly, but just thinking about going through, yeah.
You're aphids and pathogens, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, that's just like mosquitoes and human disease. I mean,
I do that one.
You've got a lot to work with there, yeah, right, yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay, look forward to seeing you next week. I love those sessions. They're great fun. They really are. Okay, thank you. Good.
Do you have the slides posted?
If they're not already, then they will be. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.